Hey fellas, how you doing? Listen, I wanted to make this video because maybe it's the first time you've come onto my YouTube channel. If you've been following me for a long time, obviously you guys would have known my story already. And sometimes when I make videos, I am conscious of I've done this video already, but then I think to myself, there's certain stories that you can never just tell once and then that's it. There's always more people that I want to get my story out and help. So what inspired me to do this video was, I suppose if I'm being really honest, firstly is to be selfish to do this video for me, because it helps me to get this stuff out. It helps me to clear any negativities that are in my mind, any stories. And secondly, or not even secondly, what's the name? Sorry, I forgot the name of that. What's the name of, I can't think of the name now. Anyway, so it's no order. If I'm being selfish sharing my story, this is going to help people. This video, I just got a thought. I was just resting downstairs in my room and I was going to write an article, and I just thought I'd rather just talk about it on YouTube. It would be a lot easier. I'd get it out to more people. So in this video I want to be speaking about childhood abuse. Now my story was a story that was really embarrassing to talk about. It's actually terrifying to talk about, because I grew up for years with an abusive father. My dad was abusive towards me, both physically and verbally. Now, it's a really painful, terrifying, confusing situation when your parent abuses you or is abusing you, because you feel, well, I can certainly speak for myself at that particular time, even now sometimes when I tell the story, you feel you don't want to be disloyal because it's a family member. So whether it's your mum or your dad or your brother or your sister, it makes you feel like that. And I certainly felt that, because I know for me growing up, my dad represented, well, he was like God to me. He was my dad, he was the man of the house. The relationship with my mum and dad was it's very traditional. My mum is the woman, my dad is the man. Times have really changed now, but we knew, as my dad would say, I wear the trousers in this house. My dad was a terrifying man. Growing up, I mean, he was abusing me from, I can't even remember. I only remember when the abuse has stopped. The abuse only stopped in the last, I'm going to be 33 now, I'd say it only really stopped in the last couple of years, and I want to talk about that in a second. And I can't even remember the exact age I was, which I don't think is very important, but I do remember roughly it was in my teens. You know, when you kind of get to sort of 12, 13, you become aware of being a man, you're more socially aware, you're fearful of your parents. Now, I just remember being terrified of my dad because he was violent. He had a vicious temper. And it wasn't just being told off. I mean, that terrified me as well. He's physically violent. I've got so many memories of him laying into me, kicking me, punching me, snapping around the head. I can even recall spitting at me, throwing stuff at me, and of course, it made me terrified. It's hard to even explain what that does to you psychologically, and it's not just violent abuse, it's how the person makes you feel when they leave the room. You feel abandoned. I felt disgusting, I felt ashamed, I felt like inhumane, I felt dirty, I felt like, the worst thing is I felt I deserved it. I felt I was a bad person and I deserved it, and I'd done something really bad. So it really, at the time, it really screwed up my psychology. And then my mum would come in the room and hug me and cry and say I'm sorry, and then my dad would come back and my mum would be afraid. My mum was afraid of my dad, the whole house was afraid of my dad. So it's a very, very strange dynamic of one parent being violent, saying you're thick, you know, sorry my language, you're a stupid cunt, you're a waste of space, you're a mummy's boy, grow up, be a man. Having to withstand all that and then have your mum say, don't listen to him, you're lovely. Very confusing, very confusing. It was confusing for me growing up, and because obviously ultimately I was frightened of my dad, I couldn't challenge him. I could never challenge him on anything, even when he was calm, in a good mood. If I was to say, no, that wasn't the right tennis player, or this wasn't the right boxer, he would say, who are you talking to? Who the fuck are you talking to? Who do you think you're talking to? Trying to outsmart me? You think you're smart? Who the fuck are you talking to? That's how, and that is that. Imagine that social awkwardness. That it is awkward. It's social awkwardness, and social awkwardness when you're frightened someone will beat you, and they are beating you. You're terrified. So you're going through all these emotions at once. So you're afraid, you're embarrassed, you're ashamed, you're furious, you're angry, but you're too scared to confront him, because I couldn't physically get the better of my dad at 13, 14, even up to 19. I couldn't get the better of him. It was only when I got to my early 20s when he naturally started to respect me a bit more, and the physical stuff stopped. But what was even worse is he still did it verbally. He still intimidated me. I was so scared of my dad I couldn't look him in the eye. So I developed this, and I've got into this before in my videos, but I developed social phobia because of my dad, which is social anxiety. I had real trouble making eye contact with people. It made me actually, it made me terrified of people. And it was weird because for many years growing up, my dad would be doing all this abuse, but when he was in a good mood, he'd be praising me. He'd be saying, oh, you're my son, I'm proud of you, be confident. He's giving me encouragement. So can you imagine the confusion? 1 minute you're being told you're worthless, you're a stupid cunt, be quiet, don't look at me, don't challenge me, do as I say. I mean, I'm not exaggerating, and I'm not going to get my mum on this video, but I'm telling, everything I'm saying is 100% the truth. God is my witness. God has given me the courage to tell this story in full and to not leave anything out, because it's difficult telling the story. I'm challenged by a million thoughts, especially what people are going to think about me, but I've got to push past that, because I know there's lots of people that need to hear what I've been through and how I overcome it, because lots of people abuse themselves, take their own life, and then go on abusing other people, which I'm going to talk about in a second. So I really want to fill you in on the details, because I just don't think it's enough just to say I went through some abuse and I worked on my confidence and I became successful and that's it. No, that's not what it was. It was terrifying, and I was so frightened of my dad I couldn't be myself around him. So this is what developed this frustration of shyness. I'm not even sure for sure I could have had it, Asperger's, low self-esteem. I mean, I think shyness is an insult. I was just plain, I was terrified, and everyone in my family knew it. That's what embarrassed me more. That's what gave me so much anger, so much hate, so much frustration. I felt disabled in the family. My mum would always look at me a certain way. There's all this unconscious behaviour going on in the house, and it was all centred around that dynamic of my dad bullying me, my mum trying to tame my dad, calm him down so he wouldn't attack me. And this is all fear. It was a combination of fear and love battling in the house. And the atmosphere, when he'd come into the room, especially when he loses temper, it was terrifying. If you was a stranger and you walked in, you'd feel the atmosphere changed. I think that's why I developed, even now as an adult, I'm really sensitive towards atmospheres. I'm sensitive towards people's behaviours, their energies, and this is not important to know for this video. And it was just this, for what was worse for me was for years I just felt I can't tell anyone. I felt trapped, and the story, the pain and the depression and the guilt and the shame from knowing that this has gone on, it used to stay in my chest, it used to get tight, and my mind, the depression was awful. And I never realised for years growing up that this was all related to what my dad did. I thought it was a number of other events, which I'm sure they played a part, but the majority of my low self-esteem, social anxiety, depression, and anger. I had a lot of anger in me, a lot of aggression I've spoken about before. I had so many fights. I was a bit of a bully myself at one particular time, because I just, everywhere I went, I'd always get bullied. And because my dad bullied me, and he was always so fearful of me being bullied by people, he created all that. So he was frightened himself, and I never seen him as someone who was frightened. When I was growing up, I thought he was invincible. I thought he was a god. I thought he had no fear. I'd never seen fear in him. I didn't realise until I matured into a man, more life experience, that he was terrified. He was afraid. That's what fear does. People abuse people because they're afraid, and they project their fears onto me. And he never admitted that he was afraid. He never showed signs of being out of control. That was his whole thing, controlling me. And I couldn't move when he was in the room. I literally couldn't move. I couldn't speak like I'm speaking now. I would be tongue-tied. I would be choking on my breath. I couldn't look at him. The only thing I could do was answer him and agree with everything he said. Literally everything. So if he said, "Are you alright?" I'd just go, "Yep." "Do you want to watch this program?" "Yep." He bullied everyone in the house. He used to take the controls. It was hell living with him. I hated him. It's horrible to say, and it broke my heart to feel that way towards my dad, because I had so much love for my mum. And obviously, as I gotten older and I worked on myself, especially through all my experiences of teaching other people confidence and having counselling myself, I actually realised, obviously, I really loved him. That's why I was so hurt. And that was difficult for me to admit for many years. And I had so much intimacy problems around him. I couldn't give him a hug. I couldn't receive a hug from him. I remember him giving me a hug a few times when I was younger, but it always felt really weird if he came close to me. It was an awful feeling. It was awful. And I felt, of course, when you've been abused, all the feelings you feel of hate, you feel them towards the person who abused you, you feel them towards yourself, and then when you calm down, you feel sorry for them. You actually feel, I felt sorry for him, I felt bad for him, I felt upset for him. And I used to see how he'd look after he calmed down. And sometimes he would apologise, and the apology would actually make it worse, because I would feel that it's normal. So I started to develop this type of psychology where relationships were all about abuse, violence, and then apologising after. And of course, as I've started to make friends with new people, and just my intuition, life experience, watching the TV, meeting other, being around my aunties, my nan, I started to realise this is not a normal way to live. Like normal people, of course everyone gets angry, it's okay for a parent to discipline someone, but to the extent of the abuse and the violence and the manipulation and the way he controlled me, it was completely wrong. And even at the time I considered getting the police, I wanted to get help, but I was always too afraid. I was afraid it'd kill me. That's how scared of him I was. I was afraid that he would tell his friends, tell everyone, and it would make me look like the bad person. So I was constantly afraid of, I can't speak up. And an interesting thing was, even when our relationship started to improve, I had a lot of hate towards him, and I was too afraid. I felt really bad for him. I felt really bad to just say to him and tell him I didn't want to hurt his feelings, because it's very common, again, in psychology, in relationships. A lot of the abuse went on when he was in, I'd say, his early 30s to his later 40s. But when he got to 50, and obviously he's in his 50s, I'm now in my 30s, he changed a lot. He's still in a temper, he's still quite violent, but all the abuse stopped. And he actually became a lot nicer, and he started to become more self-aware. And of course, I realised he felt really bad for what he did, but it still didn't take it away, because for years I wanted to tell him. I wanted to say, look, you damaged me when I was younger. And I was frightened of men. I never told this to anyone. A lot of people didn't know this. I was not just terrified of people, I was scared of men, especially men that resembled my dad's characteristics. Now, funny enough, my characteristics are very similar to my dad. So all the hate I had towards him, I hated myself. And it was just this, it was just awful. I could never enjoy my life, only in short periods. So if I got a job, like things that you do outside of your life to feel good, I'd feel good for a short amount of time. And can I just tell you how it made me feel? Because I was carrying this for so long, it made me feel like a dishonest person. It made me not be able to fully trust people. It made me feel that I was always being bad to people, even when I was being really kind, really honest. That's what this psychological trauma done to me. I used to get a voice in my head saying, if people were to really know what you was like and what you fought and what you went through, they'd never want to be friends with someone like you, because you're shit and you're not worth anything, and you're I'm finding it hard to articulate words, because it's how I felt. but I always felt like a liar. And I remember saying to my mum one day, you know what, Mum, sometimes I feel like I'm a phony. And my mum laughed. You know, my mum was really good, and she said, oh, you know, that's not true. You know, it's human nature. We all feel like that. But I didn't believe her, not because I didn't trust my mum, even though I probably didn't fully. It's because I just doubted myself. And I hated it. I hated always being, you know, I was always getting corrected by my mum and dad when friends would come and visit. It was always like, oh, there's Jonathan, you know. I really felt like this, and it's when I'm saying it now, I'm getting a voice in my head saying, you're looking for sympathy, but I don't feel like this no more. But this is how I felt back then. I felt retarded. So they'd come in the room, and I felt rude as well, because I couldn't speak to people, because every time I'd go to speak to people, whether my dad was in the room or whether I was in a completely different area, he wasn't around, I'd had that voice saying, don't sound like a cunt, don't be unintelligent, and the exact words that he said, I would hear them in my head. And the word he'd say a lot was, don't be thick, don't be stupid, and he would say it with such aggression, such intent. Those words would, you know, they had a vibratory effect on my whole body. And then years later, I always used to think one day, please, when I get older, it's going to go away. I'll forget about it, I'll forgive him, and no one's going to have to know. My biggest fear was not my dad, was not so much my dad, but was of other people knowing about what he did to me and how I felt. I thought, if I tell people, I'll be abandoned off the face of the earth. No one would want to hang around with someone who's been abused, because almost like less of a person. So it just manifested into so many different fears, so much fear. I always think, why am I so scared to do normal things? I was scared to go to job interviews, I was scared to go on first dates, I was scared to confront people, I was all scared of getting in fights. Just small things like scared if a phone bill come through, scared of, it made me scared of everything. I was scared to go out in public, I was scared to eat food around people, I was scared of my mum, and I realised as I got older, I became scared of people. So I took on so many defensive behaviours, and it was all around me trying to people please and get the approval of my dad. And I just remember thinking, this isn't right. It's not right for people to be treated like this. But then of course I'd get other voices saying, oh come on, it's not that bad what you've been through. People are getting killed, they're being raped, they're being sexually abused, they've been through much worse. But then as I got older, I realised it's not the point. It's not the point, because at the end of the day, this is something that I've gone through, and only I know how this feels, or other people that have been through this. And what about other kids that are maybe going through this now and feel that they can't speak out, they're too afraid of their mum or dad? So I got to a stage where I came to my own solution, and that is, forgiveness is important, but not to forgive the person, even though that's important, to forgive yourself. So I got to a stage where I thought, I'm not going to let him do this to me anymore. I'm not going to let this ruin my life. I'm not going to let this ruin relationships with people. And as a matter of fact, one of the most hurtful things that he ever said to me was, you're thick. So I had a huge fear of studying. I had a fear that I wasn't intelligent. So for all my life, all my 20s, I purposely didn't study. I was terrified of studying because my dad had put that on me. And as I said, I believed everything he said was real. I never questioned his beliefs about the world. And I've already said in other videos, he did many good things, but the abuse was too bad and it outweighed all the good, and I didn't trust him. And that is where so much of the anxiety came around. And every time he'd come in the room, I would shake. And all these behaviours, all these fears, all these patterns, I seen them in other people. I wouldn't see it with everyone, but I'd see it in men, I'd see it in women, and I hated people controlling me. Especially men, I couldn't handle it. That's why I got such a release out of fighting. Every time I'd fight, in my early 20s, when I would knock someone out, I'd feel so good. I'd feel like I've accomplished something. I would feel that sense of self-respect, almost like all my guilt and shame would be liberated. But then it would always come back. It would always come back, and it would come back with this guilt that you shouldn't have done it. And again, it was unconsciously me trying to seek approval from my dad, because my dad did that to me. I just thought this is how you get respect. It was all about respect to my dad. It was about respect, it was about being a man, it was about making people intimidated. And you know, as I said, in the midst of that, he had many good qualities, and those qualities reflected in me. Like, he was very kind. It's very it sounds like a contradiction, obviously, to be a genuine person. It's just, he was genuine, but he was, you know, he was full of fear. And the interesting thing was, and I'm glad, I really mean this from my heart, when my brother grew up, my brother was younger than me, my dad didn't do this to my brother. He'd learnt by then, and he didn't treat my brother this way. So that even though I was glad, because thank God me and my brother were really close, and I love my brother to bits, so I was so grateful that my brother didn't have to go through that. But even my brother stood up to my dad one day and said, my brother swore, don't fucking treat me like the way you treat Jonathan, don't try and do that to me. And of course he didn't. He stopped. He realised then he'd already lost one son, because he knew he lost me for years, because we didn't have a real relationship. It was based on fear. I couldn't even speak to him. I couldn't even be open. I couldn't be vulnerable. Occasionally I did, but it only came in the nights when, you know, I'd watch a film and he'd loosen up. But yeah, it was really awkward being around him. It felt like a stranger in my house. It felt like, why is this man sitting in my front room? That's how I felt. It made me feel uncomfortable. And it affected me in all my social relationships. Later on, I suffered erectile dysfunction with women. When I'd be attracted to a girl, I'd feel great, and then I'd have all these feelings of feeling dirty, disgusting, and then I'd just freeze up. And it's only really this year, through really changing my teaching and counselling other people and helping people with social anxiety, I was really able to identify where my social anxiety come from. Because I personally believe, and I don't need a psychologist to tell me this, that people are not born with social anxiety. It may be partly hereditary. Like, my mum is naturally quite a shy person, but I wouldn't say she's got social anxiety. Most people in my family are actually quite confident. I was confident before the abuse took place, before my dad reminded me to stop behaving like that in front of me. What he basically said was, don't be yourself around me, don't behave like that, it's not right. I think he had a lot of jealousy towards me. This is very common as well. I understand, being the firstborn child, and I could go further into his psychology, but I don't care to in this video. So my social anxiety was a symptom of my dad's abuse. So effectively, I knew that I could overcome my social anxiety if I could be brave enough to confront my dad. And I mean confront him in every way. Firstly, to really forgive myself for what he did to me. Secondly, to have the courage to tell him to his face, and to do what he'd always told me to do, what he respected, is be a man. Don't talk about a man behind his back. Tell him to his face, or fight one-on-one. Didn't want to fight my dad, because I knew by this age I could get the better of him, and that would break my heart to be fighting with my dad, because I love him. Obviously, I've forgiven him, and wrong is wrong. But at the end of the day, he's still my dad. He did a lot of good for me. So I didn't want to fight with my dad. I knew it would hurt my mum's feelings. I knew I could get the better of him. He'd probably deny that, and I would, because, you know, I'm younger, I'm physically stronger, and I'm not physically frightened of him. But I was still terrified of that story. So I confronted my dad. I think it was about, it might not even be a year ago, but it took me years to do this. I confronted him at the age of, I think, 32. And I went through this whole kind of trying to achieve things in my life, and I don't regret doing that. But really, secretly, the biggest success in my life is forgiving myself and telling my story to other people, and facing my dad and telling him the truth. And I'm just going to repeat what I said to him. And I said it in a really calm way. I made sure that I didn't lower myself to his level. I prayed to God. Before my nan passed away, my nan, fantastic relationship, when I loved her to bits, she knew what went on. She always said to me, you've got to talk to your dad, tell him how you feel. And I get emotional if I talk about my nan, because I love my nan. But I wanted to do it with class. I wanted to do the opposite of what he did. I didn't want to be angry, I didn't want to be violent. And all my practice, all my social skills, going out, meeting women, teaching men how to meet women at the time, it all contributed to me changing my ways, stopping becoming a violent person like he was and I was, and being a bully, being honest, being genuine, and doing it from a sincere place. And I came in the room one day, into the house, and my mum answered, And my mum knew straight away. She knew, she was terrified because she knew, she could just feel it. She knew I was going to go and confront him. And my mum was scared for years as well. She was frightened that he would hurt me, because there was times I thought he was going to kill me. I'm sure my mum had the same fears. So I walked in, my mum said to me nervously, "Are you all right? What's wrong? What's wrong?" And I said, "I'm fine." I said, "How are you, Mum?" I said, "Where's Dad? I want to speak to Dad." And she said, "Why? Why?" It was, that behaviour, it's that similar pattern of behaviour when I was younger. And I said, "No, I just want to go and talk to him, it's fine." My mum went upstairs because she was scared, and I went into the front room, and he was sitting on the couch, and he got up and he said, "All right, mate." And I think he went back out to make tea, came back in, and I said, "No, I'm not all right, Dad." And he was shocked, he was taken back. And he said,